Alright guys, I finally built a Raspberry Pi retro gaming console. Now my Raspberry Pi has been sitting on this desk for months. Probably over a half a year, just sitting there collecting dust in the box. Now my original plan for it was to build a custom laptop out of this old Mac PowerBook Duo. I've always liked the way this PowerBook Duo looks. I mean, it was featured in the movie Hackers, which is one of my favorite movies. I was hoping to build a custom laptop out of this, and I still have plans in the works for that, but I want to use a more powerful single board computer. Did you hear the way I said powerful? Powerful. Wow. I finally decided to just take the Raspberry Pi and build a retro gaming console. Everyone's doing it. These things are pretty cool. It's kind of cool what you can do with a Raspberry Pi by yourself in your own home, and none of it's actually difficult. Let's find out exactly what case I went with and also what image I used to flash the SD card, and overall what I think of building a retro gaming console from the Raspberry Pi. Guys, welcome back to another episode of my tiny point of view on the Deem channel. And as I stated, I finally built a retro gaming console. It's been a long time since my Raspberry Pi has been sitting over here. It was kind of time to put the thing to use and kind of see what the Raspberry Pi is all about. I've watched many videos on the internet about it. I've always been interested in it. It's cool to be able to take a single board computer and build a multitude of things out of it. The case that I went with is a Chinese version, or something to resemble the Super Nintendo. Now the reason I went with this case originally is because I liked the fact that this case had a pull down dust cover that went over the ports on the inside. As I've used this thing, I kind of realized that because the ports are recessed in there, if you're using a little dongle and you're putting it in here, it's kind of annoying to get out. It takes a little while. You have to really tug at it to get it out of there. So maybe this recessed dust cover thing isn't such a good idea. To show it in comparison to the Super Nintendo Classic, here's the Super Nintendo Classic, and here goes the Chinese version of it. As you can see, it's shrunk down and a lot smaller. The Super Nintendo Classic was meant to look exactly like the original Super Nintendo and shrunk down without messing up the aspect ratio of it. That doesn't sound right. It's supposed to be a miniature version of it, and that's exactly what it looks like. It has the slide power button and reset. This, on the other hand, does not. These buttons here are push buttons. They do not slide up and down, which is not that big of a deal. I do like the slide up and downs because it gives it that authentic, nostalgic feel to it. I also got another case that I want to compare to this, and that is the Kintaro. As you see, I have not opened it yet, but the packaging is kind of cool. On the side it says Kintaro, the folklore of a superhuman. Pretty cheesy, guys. This does have the slide up and down, reset, and power buttons. This thing looks a lot more like a miniature Super Nintendo. It says Super Kintaro Entertainment System on it. That's a nice touch. It has a Kintaro logo up here engraved. On the back you have the DC adapter, which means that this is going to be using the Raspberry Pi micro USB port, HDMI, and audio out. And on the sides you're going to have your ports, which is going to be a lot easier to pull out a dongle. This does not have any ports on the front, and here it is in comparison to this one. Actually, Kintaro case is a lot nicer. I think that's just my personal opinion, and it looks like at some point you could probably knock this out and maybe use an NIC chip and little mini SNES game cartridges. But back to what this video is about, my first Raspberry Pi retro gaming console build. Now you're not going to see me build this. I did build this on the DIY dummy. Now if you're interested to see the actual build process and installing the image on the SD card There will be a link in the description down below where you will be able to go check that video out. Do consider subscribing to the DIY Dummy channel. Now I know there's not many videos on there. It is in the works. Take a look at some of the ports on here. You have the HDMI back here and the audio jack from the Raspberry Pi. Now it does not utilize the micro USB on the Raspberry Pi. It is extended to another chip that's inside the top of this case. Then you have the Ethernet port and the two USBs, and inside is the two USBs that are on the Raspberry Pi. There is a extender in here that brings those two USB ports to the front, which I think is kind of cool. And you have vents on the back here. There is a fan in here. Now I will say, originally when I connected this, and you want to keep this in mind, and you will see that on the DIY dummy video, I connected the cable wrong. You want to make sure you watch out for that, because this thing started to smoke and almost destroyed my Raspberry Pi. The issue that I also had was that this thing seemed to overheat and shut off. The fan that's in here wasn't really doing a good job of keeping things cool in there. Now, originally I got ultimate cooling fan kit for the Raspberry Pi, which has a heatsink and dual fans on it. Now that thing is kind of cool, but the only thing is it did not fit in this case, and I don't think it's going to fit in the other NES case from Kintaro either. There are cases out there that it will fit in, but like the NES Pi, but it did not fit in this case. And also it comes with heat sink thermal stickers, and they do stay on there pretty well. Seeing the fact that it did not fit in this case, I had a hard time getting it off, and when I did get it off, it was murder to get that sticky crap off. Now you can use thermal paste, but the only problem is that fan has no way of staying on the processor and GPU, so it's going to slide back and forth as you're moving it, so that's not really a good option in my opinion. And until they find a way to be able to keep a heat sink down or attached to the Raspberry Pi, you're going to have to go with those thermal stickers. I got two mini heat sinks, and those have the thermal stickers as well. That's what's in here now. So far it seems like the Raspberry Pi is staying on and not overheating, but I have not played any N64 games and PS1 games since I put those heat sinks on. Now I decided to go with Recall Box on my Raspberry Pi Retro console build. And originally, you will see in the DIY dummy video that I went with just the basic image that came off of Recall Box. This is his website, and it was only 2 gigs. It barely had any games on it. I can't remember which site I got the actual build from, but there's plenty of Raspberry Pi Recall Box builds on the internet. I went with the 32 gig one. Now, there are larger images for the Raspberry Pi when it comes to retro gaming, but I have heard that the Raspberry Pi is a little iffy with some of the bigger cards. As soon as you go over 32, it gets a little specific as to which cards work. That's what I've heard. Now, like I said, there are bigger builds. There are like even 128 gig Raspberry Pi builds for Recall Box. Now, the Recall Box image that I got, the 32 gig, has a ton of games and a ton of systems on it. I think it's definitely over 7,000 games on it. And there's, I believe, over 15 to 20 different systems. There are a lot of systems on there I haven't heard. There's an option for favorites if you want to favorite some of the games that you play more than the others. There are 2,388 games in there. Now, I have not used an arcade stick on this Raspberry Pi, but I'm sure the same arcade stick that I use for the Super Retrocade will function on that, and at some point I will test that. I have not tested that yet. You have some of your favorite Nintendo systems, such as the Nintendo Entertainment System, and there are 1,081 games on that alone. The Nintendo Family Computer Disk System, which I personally have never played, never owned. This was something I believe that was only released in Japan. There are 78 games. I finally will get to experience that with my Raspberry Pi Retro console. There is, of course, Super Nintendo. I have N64, and I'd just like to say that the menu system is set up really nice. They did a really good job of that. There is background music, and they're all different and specific to the system themselves. So if you enter a menu for a specific system, the background music would change as you rotate through the menu system. That also changes the background music. I think it is set up really nice. Each system and each game have their box art and a thumbnail for it, which is cool as well. This is a really neat recall box build. You have other systems such as Game & Watch. I mean, they were things you can get in the drugstore that had those black and white chrome looking graphic style. You have Game Boy. You have the Virtual Boy. The Virtual Boy, which is something I own, but I only played maybe 2 or 3 games before I ended up putting down. And I did enjoy it, but for some reason the Virtual Boy just got set aside. Those stands were easy to break. I think when I first bought one, and I know, guys, this is bad, I was putting it together and I broke the stand. And I told my dad that it was broken in the box, so we went straight back to the store and told him that it was broken and got a new one. Needless to say, the second time I was really careful. But the Virtual Boy, there are 25 games in here. I think that's all that was released for the Virtual Boy. You get to experience it on here and not in the goggle version. You have Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advanced, Sega SG-1000, which I've never played. There's so many things on this recall box build. And just imagine that there's images out there that are larger than this. You have the Sega Master System, which I had as a kid when I was a teenager. I didn't have it when I was younger. We actually found it in one of the luxury high-riser buildings my dad was a super in, and someone just threw it in the trash. You have Mega Drive. You got 32X, which I've never ever played 32X. Game Gear. Had a Game Gear. I had the blue version of the Game Gear that came with Lion King. Love that thing. Ate through batteries though. You have Neo Geo, Neo Geo Pocket, Neo Geo Pocket Color. You got Atari, Atari 7800, Atari ST, Lynx, ColecoVision, Odyssey, PC Engine, Super Graphics, Vectrex. There's so many different systems built into this thing. You even have Apple II games, Commodore 64, MSX, which I think I briefly heard someone talking about that on YouTube. I don't even know what it is. I never had it. There are a lot of systems on this thing. This image is really clean. It's only 32 gigs and it still has a multitude of games and systems on it. Now the recall box is set up to use the 360 controller right out the box. I am using a G3S. Now when you first get your recall box set up, you're going to want to have to set up this controller. If you're going to use this controller, you can also use 8-bit do, which I will use in the future, but for now we're using this controller. You're going to want to hit start to go into the menu, and from there you're going to hit controller setup, I believe it is, and then configure controller. And then it'll ask you to hold A on this controller. After you hold A, it will recognize the controller. Then it'll go through the setups. You'll start mapping all the buttons up, down, left, right, the joysticks, the action buttons. It seems like in the menu, A and B are switched. I personally, for this video, just wanted to test some N64 games, because that would be the hardware pusher on the Raspberry Pi. Now, I played Banjo-Kazooie, and that game played perfectly fine. My only suggestion is when you set up the thumbsticks, make sure this one is set up as the first joystick, because I had this one set up when I got into GoldenEye, and that just was horrible, but we'll get to that in a minute. Now, Banjo-Kazooie worked perfectly fine. I mean, every once in a while the audio would chop out, but for the most part the gameplay was spot on. I enjoyed it. There was nothing majorly wrong with it that caused the gameplay to be annoying or unplayable. I also played Bomberman 64, The Second Attack, and that game, the gameplay itself worked great. Only the audio, unfortunately, was choppy and was cutting in and out for most of the time I was playing it. I also got into some Castlevania Legacy of Darkness, and the gameplay seemed to be alright. It was a little annoying with this joystick to move around and do attacks, but for the most part the game worked great. There was a lot of audio chopping and it was not spot on, so that made it a little bit annoying to play the game. And now to the one game that was probably a hardware pusher on the N64 and really destroys the Raspberry Pi, and that's GoldenEye. That game is unplayable. I didn't overclock the system, and I have seen it overclocked and it works a little bit better, but for the most part, GoldenEye does not function on the Raspberry Pi 3 at all. When the game was unplayable, it would move very slowly. By the time I got a shot off, I was already off target. The audio was horrible. Now, in my opinion, the Raspberry Pi makes for a great retro gaming emulation station. But until the Raspberry Pi 4 comes out and we see what type of specs is on that single board computer, I think we're better off just sticking to your 8 and 16-bit games. Now, I haven't tried any of the 32X games on there. I don't see them working too well, but I could be wrong. I want to save really testing some of these games and some of these systems for a later video. Probably going to be featured on WeTest. I will go through a multitude of games. I don't know why I keep saying multitude, but a various amount of games, and test all of them on this Raspberry Pi build and see how they function. But I personally think I'm gonna, for now, just stick to 8 16-bit games. Now, as I said, I have a Kintaro SNES case that I will be making that specifically Nintendo games. I will be using a Nintendo image with just Nintendo games, but I think I want to find one that does not use N64. It's just mainly all your 8 and 16-bit games. Either way, building this Raspberry Pi project was extremely fun. It was easy. I mean, really easy to put together. If you're interested to see me building this, please do check the link down below. Go ahead, head over to the DIY Dummy channel and take a look at that video. If you have any questions about the build, any questions about why I went with this image, you think that you have found a better image or an image I should have used, please leave that all in the comments down below. If you liked what you've seen in this video, please consider sharing amongst your friends, hitting that thumbs up, and if you're interested to see more from the Deem channel, hit that subscribe button.